Welcome back to Season 3 of Multifamily Unpacked. Today I was able to talk with Davidoff. And beyond having one of the best names in the entire industry, he is smart, he is unflappable, and he is a true data pioneer. In this episode, he talks about the need to go all in on initiatives, especially during a difficult economy, in order to exit on the other side ahead of the competition. Enjoy. Welcome to Multifamily Unpacked. Thanks for joining me, Donald.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always good to be with you, Johnny.
I'm so glad we're having this time to get to know each other a little bit better, but I want to highlight you. I'm impressed by you, but what would you say gives you the right to give advice, and why should people listen to you?
Yeah, I don't know that I have the right to give advice, or certainly I only have the right to give it to those who want to receive it. To the degree that anyone does give it to me, I think it's because they know that, as Microsoft says, I've eaten the dog food, right? I've lived what I'm advising on. Particularly with respect to what REBA does today, real estate business analytics, pricing, business intelligence, budgeting. 10 years at Archstone, I was the guy who brought, LRO and revenue management to the industry. But I didn't just bring it, I used it for 10 years, consulted for another 10 years, did some similar things in senior living, etc. Whatever thought leader means, I think I am one of those, but it's not just an academic thought. It's like in the trenches, having actually had to use this kind of software, use these kinds of tools. So I just try to bring a practical experience to the world.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, thought leaders also are people who know what not to do. And
Yes.
I think that's super helpful. But I've heard you speak at so many conferences, on so many panels, and you mentioned analytics. I think that is something that it seems to be something you love. Like, is that your expertise, is analytics?
Yeah, I've always been a numbers person. Ever since I was a little kid. I was that geek who did really well in math and everybody else hated. So, always felt that. My degrees in engineering, I paid for school with a ROTC scholarship. When I was in the Air Force, I worked on guidance and control systems for ICBMs. So my admittedly arrogant joke is I was a rocket engineer, not a rocket scientist. It's about as arrogant a joke as it gets. So apologies.
That's a good one.
It's a good one. But yeah, I've always been interested in how the numbers can drive decision making, and at the same time you have to take into account the people side. Like, one of the things I love about pricing is there's a very mathematical component to pricing, a very algorithmic component, and there's a very human psychology component. Like, one of my favorite books is Daniel Ariely's Predictably Irrational, which really speaks to the psychological element of pricing. So I always get bored if I'm just doing math and code, and I always get frustrated if I'm just dealing with people. And so bouncing back and forth and trying to make the two work together, that's just always been fascinating to me. And analytics platforms and predictive analytics are kind of the nexus of the two, and that's just where I've gravitated.
Yeah, and I do think you're good at it. I think if you were strictly good at numbers, and I think you would be probably pretty boring and not invited to be on a lot of these panels, but I think you have that people side. So yeah, I think it's a good combo.
Yeah, I've actually blogged on this. I use the metaphor of analytical people are red and business people are blue. And increasingly, to make business work in a technology-driven world, you need purple people, right? You need people who can straddle those two. You need your red people, you need your blue. But if you don't have some purple people, the two clash. And so I've always tried to be that boundary spanner. I've tried to be that bumblebee that's cross-pollinating around the garden. I'm ADD. I can't stay on one flower at one time. I have to sort of buzz around.
Yeah, I love that concept of being purple. It is absolutely needed. I think in order to have a successful business, you have to have a little bit of both.
Yeah, no, the stuff that I've worked on, particularly the highly analytical stuff, I'm not a good enough math person to do all that myself. So having a statistician, having somebody who's really, really deep in the numbers is critical. But I also find it's hard for them. They often solve a problem that's slightly different than what the business needs. Like the perfect example is every BI project I've seen that was technology led, right? It should be technology enabled, but it should be business led. If it's technology led, inevitably what happens is The IT folks go through all the requirements gathering. They design and build, and they proudly present it to the operators, who take one look at it and go, right? It's sort of like a funhouse mirror version of what they want. And then the tech people get really upset, like, well, why aren't you excited? I gave you exactly what you asked for.
So true.
Yeah, but you didn't give me what I needed, right? So a red person can give a blue person what they asked for. A purple person can figure out what they need. And I think, my partner and co-founder, Chris Brust, is another one like that. And throughout both of our careers, it's sort of interesting. You have to have the arrogance to say, I know what they really need, and the humility to go, but maybe I don't. Maybe I need to listen. Maybe I can learn from them as well. And somehow you find that balance. If you only give them what they ask for, they're not going to be satisfied. If you try to shove down only what you think they need, they're going to get annoyed. Somewhere in that balance is where a purple person really, really shines.
Yeah, that's super well said. I haven't heard it explained like that, but I think you nailed it.
Well, thank you.
Well, Donald, take me back a little bit. I know you shared just a little bit about the beginning of your career, but share with our listeners the lesson you learned of hard knocks that this industry gave you early on. Is there something that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stands out immediately is it doesn't matter how smart or clever you are if you can't get the field to buy in, right? The money is earned on site. Renting an apartment, servicing an apartment, earning that renewal, that's where the money is made. It's not made at headquarters. And so it's easy to sit in the ivory tower at headquarters and think you're more important than you are, but you're really not. You're only able to achieve what you can through the operators. And so one of the things that I always did about that is literally every new team member I ever had, I sat them down and I said, understand in revenue management, business intelligence, whatever the role, we're a force multiplier, right? We can make it 2x, 3x, 4x. But guess what? 2x, 3x, 4x, 0 is still 0. So if the field isn't doing it, it doesn't matter how smart we are. It doesn't matter how right we are, right? I'd rather get 2x of something I can get the field to do than 4x of something I can't get the field to do. Because the latter is going to be 0. It's not going to work. It's not going to fly. And that's really the lesson I learned very early, getting to know the operators and know their world.
And how did you do it? How did you get the operators? How did you get those boots on the ground to move forward?
The first thing is I went and I shadowed people. I shadowed a leasing agent. I shadowed a community manager. I shadowed a service manager once, right? How many people in pricing and revenue management spend a day shadowing the service manager? I went to Archstone River North, really nice A-class building. Two things were really bad in the architecture. The first was that the garbage chute was all the way inside the parking lot. Some poor porter had to manually roll that massive thing outside the parking structure twice a week so it could get picked up. Worse, the garbage chute sometimes jammed. And so every porter had 2 sets of clothes at work. Because if the garbage chute jammed, and it did 2 or 3 times a week, you already figured it out, scrunching. Literally, they climbed into the garbage, dumpster.
Terrible.
With a big old stick, went to the bottom, poked the stick until it unjammed, and guess what happens when it unjams? It all falls on them. And I just sat there going, holy cow, we're paying minimum wage, and this person is proudly doing that job. Like, I need to have the humility at headquarters to recognize what's going on there and make that connection. I'll give you one other little trick I always do, and I've taught some people this. Always have a meal with an operator, lunch, dinner, whatever. When you break bread with somebody, it just humanizes things, right? And here's the real secret. Pick up the check. It was hilarious because when I was at Archstone for 10 years, Archstone paid for the lunch no matter who picked up the check, right?
Yeah.
But I also knew that the operators are really held to a tight budget. And candidly, I wasn't held to such a tight budget, right? It wasn't that big a deal. The act of, like, I'm visiting your market and lunch is on my budget, not on your budget. Oh my God, did I score points with people for just that little gesture? It's the small human things that really make the connection.
Yeah, and it's something that you could easily just skip, thinking, oh, we all have Archstone credit cards.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great point.
But think about, again, it's spend a moment in the other person's shoes, right? I know I learned very quickly how, dare I say, fascist operators, management are about staying within budget, right? So, of course, the regional manager would pick up the check if I didn't reach for it.
Yeah.
Of course, it's still Archstone. But the empathetic act of, we'll put it on my budget, not yours. It shows you understand, it shows you care.
Yeah, no, and in the way that you even explain that and know that, I think that's great advice for everyone listening. So you helped bring so much sophistication, technology into the space. What did it look like when you came into this industry?
The color green. When I came in, the property management system was DOS-based AMSI, which literally was a green screen. Archstone was kind of ahead of the curve. Once a week, there was a dial-up upload of data so there was this crystal report that ran off the AMSI database that you then dialed up, the old dial-up connections uploaded to Excel, and somebody at headquarters re-entered that into an Access database. Wow. The system itself had no checks and balances. The very first file I got working on the simulation that eventually led to LRO, there was a field called lease term. Great, I can grab the lease term. No. We had to calculate the lease term because the field lease term was a free field. Sometimes it said 6, sometimes it said 6M, sometimes it said 6MO, sometimes it was 6 space MO. Sometimes it was wrong. It said 6, but it was a 12-month lease. So, we quickly learned that we had to go to the few data elements that were definitely correct. Start date, end date, name, unit number, and pretty much calculate everything else. So that's really what it was, what it was about. Compare that to today where, people talk about the industry being behind on technology. We're not as behind today as we were, back in 1999, 2000.
Where are we still behind?
We're still, I think the biggest challenge is data doesn't flow like water in our industry. The property management systems have a vested interest in creating moats around the data. Candidly, I think CIOs made a mistake in the early aughts where the PMSs were more clever than they and ceded ownership of the data in some cases, and it has not yet been clawed back. So I think when you go to like healthcare or travel and hospitality, there's a lot more analytics and it's a lot easier to do analytics because the data flows much more freely. We're getting there, but I think, in the hotel industry, for 40 years, there's been this thing called the STAR report, or the Smith Travel Research Report, which actually CoStar now owns. And that was people sharing data long before many industries shared data. And I think, we're more willing to share data in this industry than we were, 20 years ago, but probably still not as much as other industries. And this notion of a rising tide lifting all boats doesn't always resonate here where it may in other industries.
Yeah, there's still, I think as operators, there's a lot more friendly competition, but as vendors, not so much.
Well, not so much. And frankly, remember, the industry is fundamentally a balance sheet industry. And so I learned this early on. In the deal world, loose lips sink ships, right? Because in the deal world, it is win-lose. If I can get that deal and you don't, I win, you lose. In the operating world, if I share two ideas and you share one idea with me, right, it doesn't mean that I'm minus one idea. Or maybe I shared a little more with you than you shared with me, but I'm still plus one idea. So the operating world is more like farmers. It's more work together, and if we share best practices, the tide will rise, to mix metaphors. But the industry is run by deal guys, and candidly, deal guys, if they share information, it's not going to help them. It's only going to get used against them. So I think there's a sort of fundamental fault line between those two roles in our industry.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think this industry does get a little bit of a bad rap. I think we like to kind of rag on each other and say, multifamily is so behind. Like that was a comment that I heard nonstop when I was in the industry, my first stint. And even now I still hear it, but where are we ahead, or are we ahead in any area?
Well, I don't know if I'd say ahead or qualified as ahead versus behind. What I find interesting about this industry is I refer to it as a flypaper industry, right? How many people come into this industry, myself included, yourself included, by accident, and then we stay forever. I was working for a software company. I had clients, Harrah's Entertainment, dollar in budget rent a car, Blockbuster, believe it or not, retail, Blockbuster Video way back when, companies like that. And then this company, Archstone, became a client of mine. And then we built LRO. And then I got an opportunity to switch sides of the table and go work there. And 21 years later, I'm still in the industry, and I'll retire out of this industry. So there's got to be something about this industry that's great, or why do so many people hang around? And I actually think the very weakness that we were talking about is part of the strength. We're a highly fragmented industry, so on the operating side, we can share. Right? In the airline world, there's a half a dozen major airlines. They're in fierce competition. Package delivery, it's FedEx, DHL, USPS. There's a handful. Because of the fragmentation, we actually can share. And so I find this to be a much more collegial atmosphere than the defense engineering work I did in the Air Force, the travel and hospitality I did that I grew up in. My parents owned a travel agency. I worked in that industry for several years. It's that camaraderie, it's that collegiality that I just think we're a nicer, friendlier industry than any other that I've been exposed to, and that's what I love about hanging around.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Like I've only been back for 6 months, but it has been a reunion of a bunch of people that I just really like, and I can't even remember who was a client and who wasn't a client. I'm like, I don't know. They were just great, and I saw them at every conference. Oh yeah, they did use our software.
I mean, a couple of my best friends in the industry are from Equity Residential, and I'm an Archstone guy.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think too many United Airlines people are going to say that their best friends in the industry are from American Airlines. It's just not going to happen.
I agree. It is a good place for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Well, things are changing. The economy's changing. Tell me what reality we're facing right now as operators. And what type of data do we need to embrace to insulate ourselves from whatever instability's out there?
Yeah, it's a timely question. I mean, obviously rent growth is going to be anemic. Certainly revenue growth is going to be anemic in 2024. That's already baked in. I mean, in the past 2 years, rents have gone up 15.7%, which is 4 times what used to be considered high. It's 7 times the sort of historical average of 2.3, 2.4, and now it's up less than 1%. A month or 2 months ago, I predicted we will definitely have a housing recession. It will go negative. It's actually stayed slightly above zero a little longer than I expected, so maybe we'll get lucky. But whether it's plus 40 bips or minus 50 bips isn't really materially different, other than the psychology of the plus or minus sign. So that's really important. And unfortunately, what tends to happen is operators they get this big pucker face and they just freeze and they just stop initiatives and stop spending. It's like, my God, the rent may only be up 40 bips year over year, but it's still up over 20% year over 3 years. And historically,
that's a great point.
Yeah, even outside our industry, historically, some of the best or many of the best companies started in recessions, because in boom times, any idea can get money, good or bad. Any idea can stay afloat. Recessions or tight times actually force a separation of the wheat from the chaff. And so my advice to operators would be, don't freeze your innovation expenditures. Zero in on the 1, 2, or 3. They're going to make the most difference. Not necessarily to get you through the next year, but if you invest in something when others aren't, when we come out of this, and a year from now we will be out of this, we were out of it. Come 2004, we were out of it. Come 2010, we were out of it after the COVID recession. You're going to be moving forward when everybody else is trying to get the engine revving again. Right? It's almost like I'm a bit of a lead foot. Drives my wife nuts, but I'm a bit of a lead foot. If you come up on a stoplight and there's 2 cars on your right stopped, and your left lane there's nobody in front of you, like, isn't it such a great feeling that as soon as it turns green, you were behind them, but you're going 40 miles an hour, you just scoot right past them? Like, that's the analogy to me, is if you freeze, you're at the stoplight waiting for the recession to be over. If you pick a couple things that are really core to your business and invest in them during the downtime, you're going to be moving 40 miles an hour when everybody else has the light go from red to green. And that's the payoff. And I really think people will win huge if they think that way. It takes courage, though.
That's such a good analogy. Yeah, and I'm one of those guys that when I see the red light, I just kind of slow down a little bit before even getting there so I can keep the momentum cruising through.
I do the same thing. I don't want to stop. And, and I mean, there are places. I mean, data will help you make better decisions faster, right? If everybody's up like we were 2 years ago, okay, yes, you can make more money being up a little bit more, but everybody's feeling great. Now's the time that the really good operators are separated from the merely mediocre operators. And I think data is a big part of that. I think pricing is a big part of that. This is the time, in my opinion, to invest in that stuff.
So, yeah, and I think that's great. Everybody listening, I think, will benefit from that advice. And the question I have for you is I do think tech solutions have become more complex. They've, that there's a lot more to them, a lot more data. How do you get these operators to make those decisions when it is easier just to stay put?
How do you help get people to make decisions in the face of that challenge? I think you talk a lot about stories, like I said, about, the best companies, the best ideas often come during recessions. I think you have to hone your message. You have to really zero in on where's the benefit. How do you make it easier for people to say yes? Right? One of the challenges, we talked a little bit about change management. One of the challenges with a lot of software products is the focus is on the technology and not on the people side of it. And so if you really watch your early adopters and stay very humble, I think you can learn a lot about what do they find easy and what do they find not hard necessarily, but clumsy. And if you can take more and more of the friction out of it, make it easier to say yes, make it easier to implement, you can build a groundswell of word of mouth where people will say yes to you. One of the things I'm reminded of in sales, people are only motivated by two things: seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And they're much more oriented to avoiding pain.
Right.
And so too many vendors focus on the pleasure of their products. I like to focus on the pain avoidance. Right? So yes, it's painful in a downturn. Here's how data, BI, pricing can help minimize. It's not going to make the pain go away, but it's going to minimize that pain. Right? By the way, here's what your competitors have and you don't have.
I'm taking notes.
Much more motivating.
The FOMO. Yeah, I think that's so good.
FOMO is a much bigger motivator than, hey, it's going to be ponies and rainbows. Besides which, it's never ponies and rainbows. I mean, you've sold and implemented much more complex software across the board than me. It's never ponies and rainbows. At best, we help the change suck a little less. But after you've gone through the change, that's when you'll finally have the ponies and rainbows.
Yeah, you mentioned paying attention to those early adopters. Do you have examples of what you've seen with those early adopters and you moving with those lessons?
So here's a perfect one. So we have a product, REBA budget. It's a property budget and forecasting application. It's driver based, right? One of the things that drives me nuts about some of the incumbents is they treat outputs as inputs. So if you put occupancy as an input into a budget, how do you do variance analysis? When you miss, what do you learn about the business because you missed?
Yeah.
Right? Well, I got told I had put 95.5. I don't know why we were 94.9. But if you use drivers, you can go, oh, well, we said we were going to renew 52%. We only renewed 48. We said we were going to do 17 days to release. It was 23. That's why we missed by 60 bips. What does that teach us about our business? What can we do better next time? Okay, so that's the premise. At Archstone, highly analytical team. No problem. We grabbed data out of the PMS, massaged it in Excel, came up with those drivers. V1 of REBA budget expected customers to do the same. Well, we quickly learned not everybody has the analytical team that Archstone had. And so we leveraged our BI platform to create what we call driver dashboards. So we can show an operator in a simple little dashboard, well, here's what your rent seasonality was the past 3 years. Here's what your delinquency rate was, what your renewal rate was, what your days to lease was. And so they can quickly look at it, maybe put a little of their own spice on it, knowing what was different this year from last year, et cetera. And we made it so much easier. If we had stuck with the way we built it originally, we were expecting too much of the customer, and we wouldn't have kept clients as much as we have, and it would have been harder to sell. By really listening to what were their frustrations, what were their pain points, where was their friction, And instead of going, well, you should just go do this. Like, it's easy. It's in Excel. Come on. Just go, well, wait a moment. Even if it's easy in Excel, it's less friction.
Yeah.
Even for somebody who's an Excel expert, it's less friction to just serve it up to them and let them make a quick decision and use it. And so to me, that's a perfect example of like listening to that early adopter and going, well, how do we make their life better, easier next time? Whoa, that actually makes it easier for everybody, whether you're an Excel expert or not.
Yeah, great examples. I think with this current climate, with the rise in costs, high interest rates, turnover, what other tactical, actionable advice would you give these operators for navigating what's coming?
Everybody wants an easy button. They want sort of one magic bullet that'll just help their NOI.
That's what I want. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to tell you it doesn't exist. If it did, people would already be doing it. So, it's never about doing one or two things 100 or 200% better. It's always about doing 100 or 200 things 1 to 2% better. So I hate to sound cliche, but it is focus on the basics. I mean, the recession from COVID was so short, it wasn't really material, right? The last serious downturn we had in rental housing was the Great Recession, 2009. That's a great point. Yep. So 14 years. How many of your community managers and leasing agents were in the business 14 years ago? Close to none. None. They've never experienced a downturn. So you have to go back to the basics, right? Like, you have to sell a little harder. You have to market a little more carefully. You have to, habits that got a little dulled because it was more order taking in good times have to become sales.
Yeah.
Earning customer service, people aren't just grateful to have an apartment. They have more choices when demand is down. And so I really do think that's what you focus on. And the beauty this time is through business intelligence platforms, through pricing software, through these other kinds of analytical and data-driven tools, you actually can detect issues faster and you can help give people positive feedback on their successes faster than we could way back when. So it's that dichotomy. It's all about the people basics and then use the technology as an accelerator. Right? Back to what I said before, it's got to be 2x, 3x, but it's got to be 2x, 3x something that's not zero.
Yeah, and so I was gone for 8 years, and coming back, it does feel like we have the technology today to help you prepare for a downturn. All of those things seem like they're in place.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We in the 2002-2003 recession, how's that for dating myself? That's when we rolled out LRO. We were the only company in the industry to have automated pricing. We beat the market, at least the REITs, by over 400 bips. We beat our second closest.
That's insane.
By 200. We actually, having gone now through 3 recessions with revenue management and 3 boom times, the maybe counterintuitive thing is pricing and revenue management outperforms better in a downturn than it does in an upturn.
Interesting.
Because in an upturn, a rising tide's lifting all boats. You can make all sorts of mistakes and still make money.
Right.
In a downturn, you've got to get much more precise. You've got to be much faster. If you make a mistake and don't get a lease in an upturn, that's okay. There's another person coming tomorrow. Well, when demand is slacked, if I miss somebody I should have gotten, it might be 3, 4, 5 days before that next person comes. And so the reality is that you have to sharpen the saw more in a downturn than an upturn, and these kinds of analytical tools outperform more in a downturn than they do in an upturn.
Yeah, Donald, you are a wealth of information. I really think a lot of people are going to take a lot from what you've shared already. How do you help?
I just talk too much. That's all.
Well, it's good. It's good information. What would you suggest executives to do to make data more a part of their team and company culture? What are the best practices you've seen?
Yeah, it's the best practices I've seen. 2 steps. One is you got to invest in it. Employees are not stupid. They hear you talk about things, but they watch where you put the money, right? So where you put the money is clearly a priority. And then lead by example. Our launch customer on REBA BI, I know the tipping point where BI took off in terms of its adoption. We got to a point, I want to say it was about 6 months into the launch, and the president of the division had the courage. He went to a board meeting with no PowerPoint deck. He opened up BI on the screen, and he proceeded to do his presentation through REBA. And then when questions came, he clicked around. Now, he had to learn it, right? But he clicked around.
Totally.
He clicked around the dashboards and answered every question with the dashboards. Now, we've all heard about the grapevine as a sort of pejorative thing, like the grapevine's dangerous to executives, right? That's where bad rumors spread.
Right.
Grapevine can also be used for much good. Guess what the grapevine did? My God, did you hear what the president did? He went to the board meeting with no PowerPoint. He hasn't done, we haven't done no PowerPoint in 25 years. He did it all interactive through our BI platform. Maybe I ought to pay attention to it. Maybe I ought to use it too. Right? So lead by example, guide your people, coach your people. They will smile at what you say. They will follow what you do.
Like anything else. Yeah, so well said. And yeah, so if somebody brings you data, act on it.
Yeah.
Great advice.
Yeah.
I want to ask you just a speed round of questions here to finish up.
Sure.
If you could retire and work on a philanthropic cause, what would that be?
It's funny. I already work in the indie music space. Not everybody knows that. Actually, little known fact, I'm in the Iowa State Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
No way.
As the manager of a band that I gave a lot of management advice to for a number of years. So I've chaired Swallow Hill Music here in Denver. It's the second oldest charitable teaching and music presentation. The oldest is the Old Town School of Music in Chicago. I was 9 years as treasurer of Folk Alliance International. So, one of the things that I really believe in is that arts are underfunded. Actually, they're really privately funded because they're subsidized through the tax deductibility of 501c3s. And I just think that I really do believe that a culture or a society, is only as strong as its underlying, culture, its underlying arts culture. And I think supporting art and artists. So I've just always had a passion for the indie music scene, and I'd find some way to continue to help that.
I love that. Yeah, music plays such a huge role in my life as well. And so powerful. Yeah, I attended our local orchestra and a choir, and it was just season.
Well, here's the thing. I have some friends in the music business. Some well-known, some you wouldn't have heard of, but you've heard what they've done. Like my best friend actually co-wrote Pat Benatar's We Belong. Wow. I have tagged along with him and seen fans after show come up and tell them how they saved their life when they were suicidal. One of the songs connected with them or got them through the loss of a mother or a spouse or a child or whatever. Really, really moving stories. You and I have done a lot of good work in our careers. Nobody's ever come up and said, man, your work in pricing and revenue management really saved my life, right? And yet, these artists, they're lucky to scratch out a middle-class living. The odds are really stacked against them. And yet, they truly do save people's lives. I'm proud of what I do, but I don't save people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right about those artists. They keep going, and they're so underfunded. Thanks for making a point of that. Tell me, what's an opinion you feel so strongly about outside of the arts that you'd put on a billboard?
This may get into dangerous territory. I'd have to think about how I put it on a billboard, but I've actually had this notion of when I retire starting a blog called The Radical Center. Right? Our political and more importantly our infotainment industry is really biased to giving platforms to extremists, whether left or right. Right?
Infotainment, so that you just nailed it with that statement.
Yeah, and so it's all about getting eyeballs, it's all about getting clicks. And so I'm not saying this as a political statement for the left or the right, for Democrats or Republican, for or against any individual. But I think almost most of us are either center right or center left. Most
of us agree.
Yeah.
On what, 80-90% of issues?
Yeah, mostly. And so I think it's time to give a matching voice to extreme centrists. I'd love to find some way to put that up on a billboard. I don't know exactly how.
Oh, I love that one. Finish the sentence. Renter-centric means?
Taking 10 minutes to do something that saves the renter 5 minutes. Or better yet, investing in technology that saves every renter 5 minutes on something.
Preach. Amen. I love it. So short and concise. Okay, so this last question.
I don't do that very often. Short and concise is not my brand. Thank you.
You did it there. That was great. It's recorded. You can pull that snippet.
Even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while.
So I do think this ties to the first question on your philanthropic costs, but maybe there's something else. What is one thing you do to take care of your mental health?
Yeah, I somewhat jokingly go, I'm not sure I have mental health, but that's okay. Do any of us really? Yeah, I mean, the thing that would surprise people, music's certainly part of it, but I think the thing that would surprise people is how many hours I watch television. I decompress watching television and a lot of old stuff, well, or at least repeat stuff. I love good situation comedy, MASH, Big Bang Theory.
Yeah,
like
love
that.
MASH.
I just last night on MeTV watched an hour of Rockford Files. It brought me back to a memory of watching that show with my dad when I was 9 years old. So yeah, for my mental health, I just have to decompress. I have to lose myself in something that has nothing to do with business. Otherwise, I'm always thinking about it.
Yeah, and I don't know how you transition. For me, I am so focused on work, and then I have a ton of kids, and it's so hard just to switch right over. Yeah. But having a little time to decompress in between, I think, is helpful. And
I stopped at 2, which helps a little bit.
Yes.
My wife, I mean, they're adults now, so it doesn't matter. But at least my wife and I can still play man to man. You've got a really porous zone defense in your house.
I have some challenges.
Yeah, but no, my ADD actually helps a little bit in that because I do transition pretty quickly, pretty easily, but I do need what happens is I burn really intensely, and so I'll just work or do whatever I'm passionately involved in, and then I'll just suddenly hit a wall, and if I don't collapse somewhere for half an hour and just veg, nothing better than TV to veg in front of. That's kind of how I'm in charge. Yeah.
Right on. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Donald, all of this is great wisdom, and it's just good to catch up with you also and see you again. Yeah. If people want to know more, what's the best way they can keep track of what you're up to? And where do they find you?
Sure. I mean, obviously on LinkedIn, just search my name. There aren't too many Donald Davidoffs in the world. Real estate business analytics. Our website is getreba.com. If you type in REBA.com, you'll probably find this slightly known esoteric musician. But yeah, so getreba.com, see what we're up to. And, you can always email me, first initial, last name, at getreba.com. So ddavidoff at getreba.com. Happy to chat with anybody.
Right on. Well, thanks for joining us today, Donald. Good to see you.
Thank you.